From Chapter 15, Something He Shouldn't Have Done. Bruno went into the kitchen and got the biggest surprise of his life. There, sitting at the table, a long way from the other side of the fence, was Shmuel. Bruno could barely believe his eyes. "Shmuel," he said, "what are you doing here?" Shmuel looked up and his terrified face broke into a broad smile when he saw his friend standing there. "Bruno," he said. "What are you doing here?" repeated Bruno, for although he still didn't quite understand what took place on the other side of the fence, there was something about the people from there that made him think they shouldn't be here in his house. "He brought me," said Shmuel. "He?" asked Bruno. "You don't mean Lieutenant Kotler?" "Yes. He said there was a job for me to do here." And when Bruno looked down, he saw 64 small glasses, the ones Mother used when she was having one of her medicinal sherries, sitting on the kitchen table, and beside them a bowl of warm, soapy water and lots of paper napkins. "What on earth are you doing?" asked Bruno. "They asked me to polish the glasses," said Shmuel. "They said they needed someone with tiny fingers." As if to prove something that Bruno already knew, he held his hand out, and Bruno couldn't help but notice that it was like the hand of the pretend skeleton that Herr List had brought with him one day when they were studying human anatomy. "I'd never noticed before," he said in a disbelieving voice, almost to himself. "Never noticed what?" said Shmuel. In reply, Bruno held his own hand out so that the tips of their middle fingers were almost touching. "Our hands," he said. "They're so different. Look!" The two boys looked down at the same time, and the difference was easy to see. Although Bruno was small for his age, and certainly not fat, his hand appeared healthy and full of life. The veins weren't visible through the skin. The fingers weren't little more than dying twigs. Shmuel's hand, however, told a very different story. "How did it get like that?" he asked. "I don't know," said Shmuel. "It used to look more like yours, but I didn't notice it changing. Everyone on my side of the fence looks like this now." Bruno frowned. He thought about the people in their striped pajamas and wondered what was going on at Outwith and whether it wasn't a very bad idea if it made people look so unhealthy. None of it made any sense to him. Not wanting to look at Shmuel's hand any longer, Bruno turned round and opened the refrigerator, rooting about inside it for something to eat. There was half a stuffed chicken left over from lunchtime, and Bruno's eyes sparkled in delight, for there were very few things in life that he enjoyed more than cold chicken with sage and onion stuffing. He took a knife from the drawer and cut himself a few healthy slices, and coated them with the stuffing, before turning back to his friend. "I'm very glad you're here," he said, speaking with his mouth full. "If only you didn't have to polish the glasses, I could show you my room." "He told me not to move from this seat, or there'd be trouble." "I wouldn't mind him," said Bruno, trying to sound braver than he really was. "This isn't his house, it's mine, and when Father's away, I'm in charge. Can you believe he's never even read Treasure Island?" Shmuel looked as if he wasn't really listening. Instead, his eyes were focused on the slices of chicken and stuffing that Bruno was throwing casually into his mouth. After a moment, Bruno realized what he was looking at, and immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry, Shmuel," he said quickly. "I should have given you some chicken too. Are you hungry?" That's a question you never have to ask me, said Shmuel, who, although he had never met Gretel in his life, knew something about sarcasm, too. Wait there, I'll cut some off for you, said Bruno, opening the fridge and cutting another 3 healthy slices. No, if he comes back, said Shmuel, shaking his head quickly and looking back and forth towards the door. If who comes back? You don't mean Lieutenant Kotler? I'm just supposed to be cleaning the glasses, he said, looking at the bowl of water in front of him in despair, and then looking back at the slices of chicken that Bruno held out to him. He's not going to mind, said Bruno, who was confused by how anxious Shmuel seemed. It's only food. I can't, said Shmuel, shaking his head and looking as if he was going to cry. He'll come back, I know he will, he continued, his sentences running quickly together. I should have eaten them when you offered them. Now it's too late. If I take them, he'll come in and— Shmuel, here, said Bruno, stepping forward and putting the slices in his friend's hand. Just eat them. There's lots left for our tea. You don't have to worry about that. The boy stared at the food in his hand for a moment, and then looked up at Bruno with wide and grateful but terrified eyes. He threw one more glance in the direction of the door, and then seemed to make a decision, because he thrust all 3 slices into his mouth in one go and gobbled them down in 20 seconds flat. Well, you don't have to eat them so quickly, said Bruno. You'll make yourself sick. I don't care, said Shmuel, giving a faint smile. Thank you, Bruno. Bruno smiled back, and he was about to offer him some more food. But just at that moment, Lieutenant Kotler reappeared in the kitchen and stopped when he saw the 2 boys talking. Bruno stared at him, feeling the atmosphere grow heavy, sensing Shmuel's shoulders sinking down as he reached for another glass and began polishing. Ignoring Bruno, Lieutenant Kotler marched over to Shmuel and glared at him. What are you doing? He shouted. Didn't I tell you to polish these glasses? Shmuel nodded his head quickly and started to tremble a little as he picked up another napkin and dipped it in the water. Who told you that you were allowed to talk in this house? Continued Kotler. Do you dare to disobey me? No, sir, said Shmuel quietly. I'm sorry, sir. He looked up at Lieutenant Kotler, who frowned, leaning forward slightly and tilting his head as he examined the boy's face. Have you been eating? He asked him in a quiet voice, as if he could scarcely believe it himself. Shmuel shook his head. You have been eating, insisted Lieutenant Kotler. Did you steal something from that fridge? Shmuel opened his mouth and closed it. He opened it again and tried to find words, but there were none. He looked towards Bruno, his eyes pleading for help. Answer me! Shouted Lieutenant Kotler. Did you steal something from that fridge? No, sir. He gave it to me, said Shmuel, tears welling up in his eyes as he threw a sideways glance at Bruno. He's my friend, he added. You're, began Lieutenant Kotler, looking across at Bruno in confusion. He hesitated. What do you mean he's your friend? He asked. Do you know this boy, Bruno? Bruno's mouth dropped open, and he tried to remember the way you used your mouth if you wanted to say the word yes. He'd never seen anyone look so terrified as Shmuel did at that moment, and he wanted to say the right thing to make things better. But then he realized that he couldn't, because he was feeling just as terrified himself. From Chapter 15.